Action plan. The topic of my action plan is the use of group-based activities in enhancing your students' motivation and learning autonomy. The reasons I want to do this action plan actually has to do with two factors. So right now, let's talk about the rationale of my study. The first reason has to do with a lot of exposure to many different kinds of cooperative activities at UBC. At that time, I was not only mentally, but also physically exposed to different kinds of cooperative activities at UBC. And the other reason has to do with my own personal reflection on the teaching situation in Taiwan, in which exams always dominate this teaching in your classroom. The classroom in which your students always lack eagerness, and they do not participate very much in any activities you do in your classroom. So these are the two factors that I decided to do this research question. So that's why I came up with this research question, which investigates two questions. How can we, as an English teacher in Taiwan, actually implement these group activities in the classroom so that your student will feel motivated and will become more autonomous in the learning process? And the second research question I want to investigate is this: what kind of limitations or practical shortcomings you will face in the implementation of these group activities in the classroom in Taiwan? So these are the two research questions I want to investigate in my research question. Now let's talk about the method part. I will talk about my method part and the result part, and the last part is my the conclusion and suggestion from the findings of my study. So there were 3 classes involved in my research questions. With one being a special class, the English gifted class I taught this semester. And the material used for this action plan actually included 3 lessons, and with 3 different kinds of genres. The first lesson, The Magic of Science, it's actually expository. The second is actually narrative. The last lesson is actually a poem I had to teach. And then I tried to use different activities to cover all the lessons here. But basically, all the activities were focused on 2 parts. The first part is vocabulary learning, the second part is the text reading. And after each part, I will try to use different kinds of activities to assess their group learning. So I'll give them some time to study all the vocabulary in groups, and after that, I will try to use an activity to assess their learning, their group learning. So for this part, I will try to give them some time to read the text in groups, and after that, I'll try to give them an activity to assess their group learning of the text. So that's basically the design of the research plan. To conduct these group activities more efficiently in Taiwan, you need to have a very special classroom in order to be more efficient. So that's why I decided to use, can we dim the lights? So that you can see the pictures clearly. So I use a very spacious classroom with 6 sets of chairs. So you will look, the classroom will look like this with 6 sets of chairs, and for each set you will have 7 chairs arranged in this way. So you have 7 people for each group. So you have 6 groups of 7 students in your classroom, and sitting in the middle was actually the leader for each group. So each leader will have a leader sitting here in the middle. And then I gave a good whiteboard like this, which you can actually get for about $30 at the Daiso store in Taiwan. Very cheap, so you can probably buy 6 whiteboards for your classroom use. So later I will tell you the purpose of this whiteboard. So each group will get a whiteboard. And then for each period, I use different grouping. Like in the front of the classroom, I use this whiteboard. And then I will tell them, today, I want to change the grouping a little bit. So if you are sitting in this position, I'll call the person sitting here, group member 1, and group member 2, group member 3, 4, 5, 6, and the leader. So today I would like to change the grouping a little bit. So today, all the group member 1, please sit here, and all the group member 2 sit here, and group member 3 sit there. So you have a different grouping each time. So they didn't get to sit with their close friends all the time. Sometimes they would sit with different people. So I try to use different grouping for each period. As I said before, all the activities I use focus on 2 parts, vocabulary learning, and the other part is text reading. So let's talk about vocabulary learning first. I devoted 2 to 3 periods for this part. And to ease my students' burden, I try to select it only 5 to 7 words for each section for them to learn in groups, including the derivatives and all example sentences related to the vocabulary. But to be different from the traditional way, at this time, did not try to spend a lot of time explaining each word. I tried to just give them a very, very brief explanation and told them how to pronounce each word. So I didn't give my students a lot of grammatical explanations related to the vocabulary here. And later, after my explanations, students needed to take turns, either reading or translating example sentences like this. So right now, the first person sitting here will have to read the first example sentence. And the person sitting here across you should translate the example sentences into Chinese. And the second person sitting here should read the second example sentence, and the person sitting across should translate it. And the order just goes like this, and later I will reverse the order. So right now, let's change the order a little bit. The person sitting here should read the sentence, and the person should translate it. So the order was reversed later on. So they took turns translating and reading example sentences related to the vocabulary here. And at this time, I asked them to bring their own dictionary so they could look up the meaning of the words if they didn't know, and they would try to ask each other some questions about the meaning of words in these example sentences. I also asked the leader here. The leader here, sitting in the middle. The leader had to keep the activity going by asking them by telling each member what to do in this activity. So the leader may say, right now it's the first person's turn to read the sentence. Right now it's your turn to translate it into Chinese. So the activity will go like this, with the leader telling each member what to do in this activity. And sometimes the leader had to jot down any questions they might have, some questions they did not know the answers to. So that's basically the job of the leader for each group. At this time, just move around the classroom without doing anything except providing necessary assistance. Sometimes they will ask me, sir, could you tell me how to pronounce the word here? Could you tell me how to read the sentence? Could you tell me the meaning of the word here? So at this time, I just say to them, how about asking your peers? How about ask your members how to pronounce the words? Maybe they know how to pronounce the words. You don't have to ask me. So at this time, I try to ask them to seek answers from their peers. And then after their group study of vocabulary, I use an activity to assess their group learning in the form of this competition. So it will go like this. First, I put some words on the table in the back of the classroom, and I will show a question here like this. And then I will say, get ready for this question. Black is a what? He knows how to do a trick to make this. And the student had to read the questions. They had to sit in the back of the classroom, and they need to read the questions and maybe choose the correct word to fill in the blank here. So they have to go to the back of the classroom and get the right words and come to the front, and then they need to take the microphone. And then I'll show them the answer. So the answer is magician. So not only did they have to get the right words, they also needed to read the whole sentence correctly. So that's why I asked them to read the example sentences in their group study. So I put all the words in the back of the classroom, and the student had to read it in the back and see the questions on the screen. And as soon as they saw the questions, they needed to get the right words and come to the front and get the microphone. And then they needed to read the whole sentence correctly in order to get 1 point. So it works like a competition, a game-like competition. And sometimes a bonus question will be asked of each leader, like this. Sometimes I will pose a question for each leader. Right now, this question is for the leader. Please raise up your boards and write down the answer to my question. So each leader will have to raise up their boards and get ready for this question. Do you see the words in red here? Could you tell me the meaning of the word here? Just write up your answer. So sometimes I'll ask the leader some bonus questions related to some words in this example sentence. So, as I said before, the activity is focused on 2 parts. The first part is vocabulary learning. The second part is text reading. So, I'll devote 2 to 3 periods for the reading text in each lesson. And the student needs to read maybe 1 to 4 paragraphs for each section, depending on text length and information structure. In the beginning, I will ask the student to listen to the text on tape, like this. I will ask my students to listen to the paragraph they were going to study on tape, and then I will try to analyze some key points for each paragraph like this. So I'll just spend some time giving some basic explanations related to this paragraph, and that was all. I didn't spend much time talking about some grammatical parts in detail. And this time, students will have to study the paragraphs in groups. So they were asked to do the same thing as they did in their vocabulary learning. So the first person will have to read the first sentence in this paragraph. And the person sitting across should translate the sentence. And the second person should read the second sentence in the paragraph. And the person sitting across should translate the second sentence being read. So that's how the activity went on like that. At this time, I only move around the classroom to offer necessary assistance as I did in their group study of vocabulary. And after their group study of the text, I would give an activity to assess their group study of this text. So, as I said before, there were three genres of the text being studied here. The first one is expository text. So for this one, I only use this activity to assess their group study. I would call this a quiz show-like competition. So I will ask students some questions related to the paragraph they just read, and I'll put the questions on the screen. And for each question, the members took equal turns answering my questions by writing down the answers on the board. So I was say like this. So the first question is for group member 1. Get ready for my question. The first question. This question is, could you tell me the main idea of the paragraph here? Could you tell me what happened in the story? Write down your answer. And this question is for group member 2. Could you tell me the meaning of the words here, like this? Write down your answer. And could you give me one word that's similar to the meaning of the word here? Okay. Could you make a sentence based on this sentence structure you see here? Write down your answer. Make a simple sentence. So the activity will go like this. I'll ask them to write down the answers on the board. And for the second kind of text, which is the narrative text, which is for the second lesson for my action plan, the Phantom of the Opera, I use three kinds of activity to assess their group learning. The first is called a sentence unscrambling competition. So first, could you dim the lights? First, I will choose one paragraph they just read and try to put all the sentences from the paragraph on the floor like this. And the student had to hurry to the floor to get the right sentence paper in order to put the whole paragraph in correct order. So they were asked to take turns, hurry to the floor, and asking the next and taking the next sentence straight back to their group. And at this time, I'll give the group leader like this. Each group will be given only the first two sentences and only the last two sentences for this paragraph. And I will give this paper to each group each group leader. Each group leader had to be a judge for another group, telling people if the paper they took was the right sentence in order. So the leader would get this paper from me in order to tell them whether the paper they got was the right sentence in the right order. And the second activity I use for this lesson is called a sentence making competition. It goes like this. First, I chose some words from the paragraph that just read like this: love deeply. One of them was usually a word or a verbal phrase from the text. And I asked them to use the words given here to make up a sentence about the story they just read. They could not make any sentence in the way they wanted. They need to use the words given here to make up a sentence about what happened in the story. And they were also asked to use the words to make a sentence by using the names of the characters from the story as the subject or as the object for the sentence they made. And I will ask them to write down their sentence on the board. And at this time, I will try to elicit peer editing by having one group proofread the answers from the other group. Like I'll do this. So the answer from group 1 is like this. So group 2, could you find any errors from the answer here? Could you tell me? Is it correct without any errors? So at this time, I'll try to elicit peer editing from each group by doing what I just did. And then the last activity I use for this lesson is a 6-line speech. So I'll give them a worksheet like this. So for this activity, I choose a scene from the story, and the scene is usually full of actions, so the students could act while speaking. So I tried to choose a scene that's full of actions and dramatic. So the student were asked to come up with 2 lines for each character based on the instructions given here, related to the emotions, the actions of each character. So they do not copy sentences from the story. They need to come up with their own original lines. And I also assigned one role for each group. So right now, group member 2, group member 3, right now you should spend some time memorizing the lines of Christine's. And group member 5, group member 6, you should play the role of Fenton. And group member 1, group member 4, and the leader, you should play the role of Raul or Raul. So I will give them maybe 2 minutes for rehearsal. And after that, then I will randomly choose some people from each group to put on the speech like this. And when they were performing their speech, they were asked to memorize their lines without taking their script with them. And they were asked to use microphones. They were asked to use some props I prepared like this. I tried to give them some props to use, so you might wonder what the purpose of these props was, because I wanted to fully engage my student in the process of acting. So if you ask your student to hold the mask like this and hold the gun like this, they were fully painful. they could not take their script and try to take a look at their script. They were fully handful, like this. Because I'm running out of time, so I'm going to slow through my presentation very fast. So, and for this part, the lesson related to the poem, I tried to use a similar game like this quiz show like competition, but this time it was quite different. Instead of using the Microsoft PowerPoint, I used a very cool, visual, interesting presentation tool like this. I will show you a crazy file I made for this lesson. So I'll put all my questions for this point like this. I'll ask, get ready for my first question. Could you tell me how many lines and how many stanzas are there in this poem? Could you tell me? Write down your answer on the board. Yeah, write down your answer. And then get ready for my second questions. Find all the rhyming words in the poem. Write down all the rhyming words on the board like this. So it's quite interesting and full of visual effect like this. So you can try to use this a very cool presentation tool in presenting your questions to the students. So the second part I use for this lesson is that I asked my students to write a poem related to the topic of the poem they're studying in this lesson. First, I'll ask them to write down the title at the top of the poster, and I will ask them to write at least six lines with 5 rhyming words. With the first sentence starting from this: I had a dream that I was teaching what? The topic of the poem was about a dream of being a teacher. So I also asked them to draw some relevant pictures in order to make the poem more interesting, more fun. Okay. And then after that, I asked them to put their posters on the wall in order for next class to vote for their favorite. So the first section is about making a poem poster. The second section is about voting for their favorite poem. So I put all the posters on the wall, and for the next class to vote. And the groups who got the most votes will get extra points. So here are some of the words from my students. So let's talk about the result part. I used a questionnaire to investigate whether there was a obvious change in my students' behavior in terms of their learning motivation and their learning autonomy. I also asked them to write down their written comments at the bottom of the questionnaires like this. So I gave them a questionnaire like this, and I also asked them to write down any comments they might have related to some suggestions and some drawback they saw in the process of their learning. And also I used my own personal reflection to analyze the results related to the two research questions. Let's talk about the first research questions. As you can see from the results here, especially the numbers from the questionnaires, my students do feel that they became more motivated to learn in these activities because the activities were very interesting, because they could get a lot of help from their peers, because they felt less anxious, because they had learned a lot in these activities than in those traditional teaching activities. So they did become very motivated. How about their learning autonomy? They did feel they became more autonomous because they exhibited the following behavior. Like they will try to ask questions of their peers. They will try to share their personal knowledge and experience. They will try to read the text and try to comprehend the text. And they will try to clarify any misunderstanding in the reading of the text. So they became more autonomous. So overall, the activities I used for this action plan is that they didn't like the random grouping because as students we all like to work with our best friends. That's why the result for these questions is so low, so negative. And then finally, talk about the limitations I faced when conducting this activity. For this action plan, I use random grouping, but sometimes this will result in uneven proficiency levels among groups. Sometimes in doing a certain activity, sometimes you will have one group always perform better than other groups. Somehow you cannot avoid this kind of problem occurring in your classroom. And then I tried to use a special classroom, but this would pose a big issue as far as classroom management is concerned because the students sitting together will tend to be more noisy and more chaotic, and they will try to interfere with others when they were talking, and they were tending to be chatting or fooling around. And I also use a lot of game-like group competitions, but sometimes some students would say that the activity was kind of boring, childish, irrelevant to their learning, irrelevant to the exams, their final exams. And sometimes the activity was unfair because of some groups cheating. And because they also said the activity was kind of distracting from their own learning, and sometimes the activity was kind of violent. Yeah. Because they had to run to the back and get to the words, and then come to the front and get the microphone, and then have to read the whole sentence. It's kind of violent. And then, because all the activities focus on learner-centeredness, that means you will have less formal teaching. But this is a big problem in Taiwan because some students will complain they needed more detailed explanations of the vocabulary, the reading. So they needed more explanation. They needed to take more notes. So sometimes this will become a problem for you. You do a lot of group-based activities. And this is most important, maybe the main reason why most teachers don't want to do this group activity in Taiwan. Every single day in doing this action plan, I was mentally stressed out because I had to literally rack my brains to come up with some very interesting interactive activities. So every single day I was very anxious. And also, yeah, because I needed to do a lot of preparations and do brainstorming, and I had to face a lot of time pressure from the curriculum. And sometimes you did not know whether the activity would go well as you had planned, because you did not know how would happen in your classroom. You tended to have less control in the classroom. So finally, talk about the conclusion and suggestions. From the results listed in my slides, you can really see there is a great change in your students' behavior in terms of their learning motivation and learning autonomy. You do implement some group activities in your classroom, but at the same time, you should remember there are some drawbacks related to these group activities. That is, you have less control, and your student will complain about not having time to take notes. But in order to take both advantages and disadvantages into consideration, sometimes teachers can do the following things. Sometimes it's okay to use these group activities once in a while just to spice up your teaching, especially when you are teaching stories. And sometimes you don't have to really rack your brains to come up with really interesting activities. Sometimes the simple one, like here, you ask your students to study text in books, you ask them to read a sentence, you ask them to translate the sentence, you ask them to ask each other some questions. These activities is quite simple but very effective. And my students say they really like this activity, although it was very simple. And sometimes in Taiwan, it's necessary for you to spend some time giving your students some basic formal explanations related to words or the reading text before you do some kind of interactive activity. And then finally, if you want to do these activities more efficiently, you need to use a special classroom so that your student will come to a classroom and you don't have to spend a lot of time asking them to sit here and to sit here. So you will have a special classroom with the chairs pre-arranged in advance. So that's basically the presentation of my action research.
We can take a couple of questions. No questions? There's one over here. Excuse me. I need to give a wing applause for designing such curriculum in each lesson. But I have one question. Since you are designing a lesson, why don't you just focus on one part? Because each part you have many different activity.
Oh.
For example, in a text reading, why don't you just use one? For example, a sentence on scribbling, but you also use action, many. So what motivates that you want to use so many activities in one text?
The reason I use different kinds of activities is that I don't want to make my students feel bored in classroom when I just keep doing the same activity all the time. But in doing so, I also make myself mentally stressed out every single day. Yeah.
So how many times have you already practiced this way in your class?
I use the same activities with 3 classes. So the first time it was always not so good as I had expected, but the third class it became better. Yeah.
Thanks.
That's when I became mentally better about myself.
Another question?
I really appreciate the way you kept your students busy. I believe that your students will never fall asleep in your class. But time is always our main concern. One of
Yeah.
our main concerns. I wonder how many hours altogether it took you to finish units.
Maybe 2 periods for vocabulary and 2 periods for the text. And I will try to use the traditional way of teaching sentence patterns. So for sentence patterns, I will try to teach them in the traditional classroom. Yeah.
So 5 hours, 40 minutes.
Yeah. But sometimes if I had a lot of time pressure, I would try to spend some time covering some vocabularies first, and I would leave the rest of the vocabulary for them to study. So that's how I did my lesson plans here in the face of time pressure.
Just gonna ask one. I think congratulations. That's a lot of work and a lot of, I can see the pressure, the stress of trying to organize. But were your students motivated? Did you feel like they were?
At the beginning of the semester, some of my teachers asked me if I would try to use the same method this semester.
Yeah, that was my next question.
Yeah, I told them because of the time pressure, maybe I'll try to use one lesson, yeah, especially with stories. Yeah.
I think that was your question. Maybe you have to do just a little bit here and there.
But I think it's okay for you to mix the 2 styles once in a while. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Thank
1:30 for the afternoon. I'm back in the big room.